Integrate. You ready?
You.
Integrative Pest Management, Michael
Like
Trevizo.
I said, the front row, I can't hear what's going on. So.
Oh, emptied out this room, huh?
No, you didn't. We're still here. We're not empty.
What did you plant?
I've grown all kinds of stuff. I was growing strawberries, tomatoes, and now I'm kind of just doing mixed vegetables, and I want to do about a couple acres of strawberries, you pick, and starting to get into the orcharding. But I thought there was cucumber beetles. We went over with spinosad. Spinosad is what I had used, but there's no real good bios for cucumber beetles, unfortunately, that I know of anyway. Yeah. There might be something out there that I don't know of. I'll give you that, but I don't know of anything out there that works, real good on cucumber beetles or any of the beetles except for the beetle larvae in the ground, which are the nematodes, which is a nematode you should be putting in your farm anyway. Even if you don't know, even if you don't have a problem, you should be putting nematodes in the ground. Period. Yeah, and they're cheap. I mean, look.
There's like 3 different nematodes affect kinds of nematodes for different things, though.
There's. I don't want to break this.
Put all 3 of them in.
Yeah, so let's see here. Like this is an old price sheet, right? I got this from BioBest, but it was back in 2018. I don't have a newer one. This is an old price sheet. They've up only.
Double the price.
Yeah, the price has probably gone up 25% just to be like conservative with my guess. But you get a price sheet like this, and it'll tell you the pest, right?
Biobuy.com.
BioBest.
BioBest.
Yeah, it's all one word. BIOBEST.
So what are the harmful nematodes you always hear about trying to get rid of?
Root knot nematodes. So nematodes, they come in all kinds. I mean, every parasite you'll ever have in your body essentially is a nematode. These things come, and there's multiple genuses and just millions of species. They're just so vast that they don't even really have a, what do they call it, a genetic tree for them. What they do is that they just classify them based off of their body parts. There's like 7 or 8 different body parts they have. The root knot nematodes are the ones that have this needle that shoots out and they suck. And essentially they pierce into the roots and they start sucking and the nutrients out of the roots and they affect your crop. You need to control those with predatory nematodes. That'll kill them. So nematodes killing nematodes is what that's all about.
You said Copart.
Koppart is the name of that company. All right, I guess I'll get started here. All right. I'm sorry?
ARBICO Organic?
Yeah, organics, that's the other one. Okay. All right, I'll get started here again. Let's just go ahead and open up with the word of prayer, and we'll get going again. Okay, also, I think I mentioned it, but those that didn't hear it, we'll try to save the questions till the end. I'll try to save the last like 10, 15 minutes for questions, just for the audio verse. They're supposed to record this and put it up online. So it'd be a good idea to just save those questions till the end, all right? Let's go ahead and open up with prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to be here. We thank you for everyone that's here in the room. We ask that you please would bless our time here and that you would please give us your spirit, direct us, and watch over us. And thank you for being able to talk about your wonderful creation and all the wonderful things you do for us. We pray asking this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Okay, so some main facts. I guess I can move this a little bit over. Some main facts to think about when we're talking about IPM and introducing biological controls. Money. That's what it comes down to. As a grower, you have all these expenses, and you got to keep those down. So it's really sometimes it's not worth spending the money on a large. Well, I'll put it this way. It's not practical to spend a lot of money buying a whole bunch of biologicals to try to control a certain pest. And usually this is because once the numbers are out of control, again, it goes back to a numbers game, you're not going to win. You're going to lose anyway. So if you were to try to overdo it, you'd have to buy so much, it just wouldn't be practical. So again, IPM is mostly before there's a problem. You want to do it before you have an infestation. So again, you got to take an approach that makes financial sense for your growing system and your farms. You can't just do whatever you wish. or, I mean, unless you just have infinite funds, but most of us don't do that. You have to purchase the correct organism, right, the correct biological for the correct target pest. So sometimes people get them confused and they think that, well, oh, this mite's supposed to do whatever, or this wasp is supposed to parasitize a certain aphid. So you got to identify your pest first. So know your problem. Figure that problem out first, and then you'll know what organism to introduce. Or maybe not an organism, maybe you have to go to some spray. But even if you're going to spray, you have to identify the pest. Because if you don't know what your pest is, you're wasting money. Because sprays aren't free either. They cost money. They get expensive too. So we have to identify your pest. And proper pest identification goes back into having the right lens, knowing, going out and scouting, looking for it, and understanding the damage. And sometimes you have to, go out to an extension service or a consultant or somebody else to help you figure out what that pest is. But whatever you have to do, identify the pest. That's the important key point. So again, the organism must be at the right place at the right time, and you must apply them immediately upon receiving them. So when you order these biologicals from any of these companies, you have to apply them right away. They don't have much of a shelf life. Some of them have to be refrigerated, some of them don't, but they do need to be applied within a day or two, and preferably the day that they arrive. Because when you get them, they've already spent a couple of days in freight being moved from somewhere to somewhere. And by the time they come to you, well, actually, the way the industry goes, a lot of the stuff is made in different parts of the country because they breed well there. So, you can get them from Spain, you can get them from Africa, you can get them from the Netherlands, they can come from Mexico. You don't know where they're coming from, but they got to fly. They fly a whole bunch of these organisms off to some particular area in the United States, and then from there, they get shipped to some distribution place and then come to you. So they've been literally around the world sometimes before they come to you. So it's a good idea to put them out as soon as you get them. We have to check for predation and compatibility with other bios that you're about to apply or you're hoping to apply. So an example of this is Amblisius andersoni. It's a predatory mite, but it consumes any mite. So it's not a very hungry one, so it hunts somewhat slowly, but it's a great mite for preventative, because it can also consume the pollen of the flowers. So it doesn't have to have the pest there in order to survive. And what's great about it is that you can keep this organism out in your crop, and you don't have to worry about whether or not it's eating. It's going to find something to eat, and it'll survive. And then when the pest does arrive, it's already there. So it helps to slow it down, but it usually won't win the race. In other words, it doesn't reproduce faster than the pest. So if you're dealing with spider mites will outnumber andersoni any day. Any day. So you can't expect to control them completely, but you can expect andersoni to suppress it to the point where it's not likely to become as much of a problem as quickly. So at least it's slowing it down. You'll have to turn to other organisms to suppress it. Though some might argue that and say, no, you can control it, because there is a lot of, in IPM, there's a lot of opinions. That's what you'll find. You ask one guy something, he'll tell you one thing, and then somebody will tell you something else. But in practice is where you're really going to see what's going to work and what's not going to work. So here's some of the predatory mites I wanted to get into. Amblisius swarsky, Amblisius andersoni, Amblisius Californicus, Blissius Cucumeris, and Persimilis, and Phytocilius persimilis. These are 5 mites that are very readily available. You can buy them in multiple different places and apply them where you are. So, I mentioned earlier andersoni, and you see andersoni will consume all the other 4. So if you're releasing the other 4 for some reason, and then you want to come and release andersoni, there's a pretty good chance if there's nothing else to eat, they're going to eat these other mites. So you're buying a mite to feed mites. That not too smart. So you got to make sure that what you're doing is logical, and this is why I say the andersoni should be introduced early. And then if you do develop a problem, well, then you can come in with one of the other mites. But if you don't develop a problem, then you don't buy anything. You just leave it alone. All right. So let's talk about Amblisius swarsky here. Swarsky is a great mite for controlling thrips and whiteflies. This is the actual picture on the top right. That's the actual mite, and I believe what he is consuming is a thrip, a young thrip larva. This is how they actually work, or this is what they actually do on the surface of your crop, right? And this picture right here is whitefly. Some of you may not be familiar with what whitefly is, but here's a mature whitefly, and then you see these eggs. So the Swarovski, really, they love to eat eggs. They don't like the adults so much. So what you're doing is you're releasing these mites to run around the surface of the crop to consume eggs. A whitefly life cycle, oh, I forgot to put that in there. I'm sorry, I didn't put that in my slide. I wanted to put the life cycle of Swarovski, but I think it's something like 10 days or so from egg to adult, 10 to 15 days. So it's slower than whitefly. Whiteflies, in 6 to 10 days from when they're hatched, they're already ready, sexually mature. So in other words, this organism in 6 to 10 days, this particular fly, is ready to produce or to lay eggs 6 to 10 days, right? 6 to 10 days after it was born. It is so fast. This is why I'm telling you, these problems multiply quickly. So I mentioned in the last hour about God's army. That is insane. And this isn't even the fastest. Aphids got that beat. Aphids are born pregnant. Yes. For the asexual reproduction, they're born pregnant. For sexual reproduction, they're not, but for asexual, they're born and they're already ready to throw another litter out. And that's ready to throw another one out because it's asexual. It doesn't require males. So to get ahead of these numbers is impressive. That's why I go back to Joel chapter 2. It's like, wow, this is really God's army. It reproduces quickly. But so one of the things I know about Swarovski, it's great for managing thrips, but with mites, not all mites can go on all crops. And I know from one of the things I can tell you from experience is Swarovski doesn't really like to walk on tomato leaves. The trichomes of the leaves are so high. So you realize this is a tiny little mite. You're looking at this picture right here at probably, I'd say 20x, maybe 25x amplification, right? And then of course it's amplified even more because it's up here on this screen. But if we were to try to amplify something, I got a 1 liter bottle of water here, and then I got a regular marker, right? So imagine these are the trichomes on a leaf of a tomato plant. It's something like this, and you got a whole bunch of them on the leaf, right? And then you got a tiny little mite about this big trying to walk on it. It can't. You see that? Yeah. Thrips, they'll just fly from leaf to leaf, and they'll leave their eggs. The eggs will hatch, they'll consume the leaf matter, then they'll pupate, come back up to adult, etc. So for Swarovski to try to walk on a tomato leaf, it's pretty tough.
So you don't use Swarovski?
You really don't want to use Swarovskis on tomatoes, okay, is what I'm trying to say. And that's why. They do not walk on the crop very well. So it's not necessarily the best way to manage them. You can put them on there, but you're not going to have great success. You're mostly just wasting your money. And that was just an example of how that works. So Amblisius Cucumeris, this is another one, is a predator of thrips. So releasing Cucumeris and Swarovski in sachets for the management of thrips and whiteflies, as well as, see, I think I'm forgetting one here. They might dine on spider mites, but they don't really prefer it, you know. They prefer thrips and whiteflies. And I think actually what they'll do, they'll go after the egg of the spider mite, but they don't prefer it.
Thrips, are they microscopic?
Yeah, so this right here on the thrips, thrips are much larger actually. Thrips you can see with the naked eye, and they're probably like, from the head here of the antenna to the tail in the back here, it's probably like 5 millimeters. Maybe 4, 3 at the smallest. They're real small, but what the thrips do is that they'll go into they like to suck and get the sap out of the plant, but what their biggest problem is that they go into the flower and they start sucking that nectar, they start penetrating it, and what happens is that they form the pistil and the ovaries, and when that fruit ripens, it's ugly. It's crooked, your cucumbers are crooked, your tomatoes can be crooked, just deformed, and they're just not good for market. And that's what thrips do. So for managing thrips, these are two different mites. Swarovski and Cucumeris will work, and they work together. They're very compatible. So management of management of thrips in flowers as well as cucumbers and watermelons and those other crops, let's see, you don't really see them too much in strawberries, but you could do it in strawberries. The best thing to do is sachets. And you could purchase sachets, and these sachets are just tiny little, maybe, I don't know, 3 by 3 inch square. Inside is a bunch of eggs with some food. Those eggs will hatch, and then, and actually it's like a little micro environment inside these little sachets, little bags you can hang, and there's enough food inside of there. There's enough food inside of there for multiple generations, and you'll get about 6 to 8 weeks of eggs hatching. So you have living organisms in there. They'll breed and they'll continue to consume that food, and then as they breed, young mites are born, which will just leave the sachet and they'll start crawling on the plants. So these sachets are really nice because you can put them on your crop and they'll be there for at least 6 to 8 weeks. And they're pretty cheap too. They're I don't know. I could give you an example of what they cost in 2018. So say I wanted to manage thrips with Amblisius Cucumeris and I wanted to buy sachets with hooks. I mean, you get 500 sachets. 500 would do like half an acre. I don't know how big your production. That's a lot. Anyway, well, back in the days of 66, it's probably like $75 today, maybe 100. So for $100, you get 500 sachets. That's pretty cheap. It's pretty cheap to manage thrips and whiteflies. And that was Swarovski. I'm sorry, Swarovski is the cheapest one. No, that was Cucumeris. Let's see. Here's Swarovski down here. You can get where is it? I know I got the sachets in here somewhere. You can get them actually as adults as well in a bottle where they're ready to go, and you spray them on your crop. You just sprinkle it on your crop, and you get 250 milliliters or all the way up to 500 milliliters, which has 2,000 mites inside of it. And that's, what, $150 maybe? $175 probably if you were to get it now. Let's see. Here's another one. This is Motheris aramicus and mundus. These are two different, they're actually two different mites, and I'm sorry, not mites. They're two different parasitoids. I wanted to talk about this one because we're talking about whiteflies, but this is not a mite. This is actually a parasitic wasp. However, there's two different varieties, and you can buy them together, you can buy them separate. And the reason why they put them together is because they go after different thrips. Not all thrips are the same, so some of these are species specific. And if you don't really know what thrips you have, you only know you have thrips, it's good to get the actual aramicus and mundus together because you know you're going to get them. You don't have to sit there and identify it, right? So this is one of the reasons sometimes people have both. If you got both, it's a good idea to manage them that way as well. But the parasitic wasps, they're born, they start hunting, they look for it, they'll parasitize the eggs, and more generations will come out, right? So let's see here. In these particular examples, both of these, actually the aramicus lays 800 to 250 eggs during its 10 to 16-day life cycle. And these guys are laying eggs at 6 days, right? 6 to 10 days they start laying eggs, and I think they're laying something like 5 to 10 eggs a day or something like that is what thrips do. 5 to 10 eggs a day. So we're looking at the reproductive capacity of a whitefly compared to the reproductive capacity of the wasp. And the whitefly will outnumber the wasp. The undesired pest almost always, that's a general rule of thumb, the undesired pest almost always can out-reproduce whatever pest we have in our IPM program, right? So that's why it's so critical that you introduce them early and you keep those numbers right. And this is why I say it's a numbers game. Numbers, numbers, numbers. Because if you cannot keep up with this, if you don't have an IPM program that is keeping up with the reproductive rate of whatever your target pest is, like whiteflies or spider mites or aphids, you're going to lose the battle. They're going to outnumber whatever organisms bios you have out there, and eventually take over your crop. So it's,
mites also?
no, these are not mites. These are predatory. Parasitic wasp.
Basically for whitefly control?
For whitefly, yes, largely for whitefly. And these work by, again, I believe I mentioned they work by parasitizing the eggs. And actually, all right.
Since you were talking about numbers, when you're making your purchase, you're assessing where I'm at on my pest infestation in order to match that.
Again, so when purchasing, what you need to start with is, what do you think you have? What pest do you either know you have or you think you're going to have? If your neighbor farm tells you, hey, I got whiteflies, or John down the road, he's got whitefly problems, you should sit there and say, ooh, well, I better put out something for whiteflies, because if he's just down the road and he has that problem, chances are they're coming your way. So it's good to do the preventative application before you have the problem. But if you have this huge infestation, you're probably not going to manage it with bio. It's too late.
But if you're out scouting,
and you see them,
you have to account for the reproductive rate of the target.
Yes.
In applying your predator rates in order to bring that under control.
Yeah, so you have to bring it under control by, first off, if you find them, right? So say you scout something, it's the first time you've ever seen, you've never had this pest there before. Say something like spider mites. You find spider mites. So you need to figure out, well, how much do I have? Well, if you have just a small little colony on one plant back in a corner somewhere, some people will say, well, I'll rip this out, I'll burn it or whatever, but you can't, you'll never really get rid of them. They're going to come back, right? So you have to think about, okay, well, if I took care of that particular plant by ripping it out, burning it, or whatever you did, maybe you spray it. Sometimes growers, what most growers will do is they identify in their scouting, somebody that's scouting will find a particular pest, and what they do, they'll spot spray that area with whatever knockdown spray they have for that pest. And then once you do that, then you apply the biologicals as a preventative, because you know it's there, and you concentrate a good chunk of that purchase in that area where you found them, where you just sprayed, because the sprays will never kill 100% of the target pest. So that's the best way to approach that problem. All right. So then, let's see. Incarcero Formosa is another one. Parasitic Wasp, and they live for about 12 days and can lay about 59 eggs during that time. So this is a really good preventative, but this will never be curative. Never. Incarcero Formosa should never be used as curative, because it will not knock any kind of infestation down. It will only, at best, just prevent. Laying 59 eggs in its entire lifetime, it's not very, it just doesn't reproduce that great. It doesn't. It really doesn't. And this one, I believe, is also for thrips and aphids. No, thrips. Oh, that's whitefly. I'm sorry. Yeah. That is a whitefly. That's whitefly. Incarcero Formosa is used for the control of whiteflies as a preventative, not as a treatment. So now we go to Amblisius Amblisius andersoni. I spoke about this one a little bit earlier. This is a mite predator, and I know they say that this one can consume russet mites, but I've heard that it's only marginally effective, and in my experience, it wasn't that great. But again, it goes back to the fact that I don't believe Amblisius andersoni can really walk on tomatoes very well. It might be able to walk on tobacco or cannabis, or I think it can do some of the peppers, but not tomatoes. It doesn't really like walking on tomatoes.
What's for tomatoes?
Not much. No, not much with mites, because they don't walk on them very well. One thing that's really nice about it, no, I'm sorry, this doesn't walk. That was supposed to, I'm sorry. My slides say it's only mite that walks well on tomatoes. No, it's a mite that doesn't walk well on tomatoes. I made that mistake. I'm sorry. It does. I don't believe it walks well. It's supposed to be better than Swarovski and some of the other ones because it's a little larger, but it's still limited, and it's not very effective. One thing that is really nice about Andersoni, though, it is a hotter, it does tolerate hotter climates. So I was talking about earlier, if we had a greenhouse where we're hitting 100 plus every day in that house, and we're trying to control mites like two-spotted spider mite, if we're going, I think the Persimilis up in the upper 90s somewhere starts to really slow down. It doesn't reproduce as quickly, while the Andersoni will. But the problem is the Andersoni is not as hungry either, so it doesn't feed as well as the Persimilis will. The Persimilis will eat way more two-spotted spider mite than Andersoni ever will. So these are just little tricks that you have to consider, and things you have to consider when you're releasing these bios and selecting them. I talked about spider mites. There are all kinds of varieties of spider mites here, and this thing kind of sort of cuts out a little bit, but up here on the top three, they're somewhat half cut out, but those are the main two-spotted spider mites you'll find. But all these other mites that you see here, and I forget, there's 30 or 40. There's a whole bunch of varieties of mites. There's just a whole bunch. But these organisms these bios will consume almost all of them. Egg, adult, and larvae.
So I have spider mites occasionally, and I have no idea what kind of spider mites they are. Maybe they are the two-spotted.
It's most likely the two-spotted, but the issue is it almost doesn't really matter. If you release a bio that consumes and feeds on mites, it's going to most likely eat that mite without knowing what it is. And if it doesn't eat the mite, it'll oftentimes at least eat the egg, so it arrests that reproduction cycle. So you keep that adult and you try to prevent the next generation from coming up. And because these organisms, they just live for a few weeks, again, this doesn't cure everything right away. It might take a month or two before you see this. In my experience, like with strawberries that were heavily infested with two-spotted spider mite, and when I introduced Persimilis, it took almost a month to just totally get rid of the problem. It got to a point where the strawberries were completely covered in Persimilis. There was just so much Persimilis running around. And if you ever watch it, these guys hustle. They just run all over that plant, and they look for a spider mite, and once they find it, they eat it. That's why they consume so much, because they burn so much energy. They're moved. They don't sit still. You just watch them, and you can see them running, these little orange dots. They kind of look like this right here, like the M square here. They look something like that's what Persimilis. I'll show you a picture in just a minute. And they really hustle. They just scoot, and they find something, they eat it, and then they keep going. But they have a very high metabolism, and they consume a lot fast. So Persimilis is definitely, it's the poster child of IPM, because it's the silver bullet. It's that example where you bring this one organism in, and you've got just this horrible problem, right? And then, bam, it just knocks it out after a few weeks. That's Persimilis on two-spotted spider mite, especially on strawberries. And that's what it is used for the most, strawberries and cukes. Okay, yeah, so I was going to talk a little bit about spider mite life cycle. Obviously, it's a life, it's a mite. Let's see, they feed mostly on the underside of the leaf. They penetrate the cells, bursting the cells. You'll start to see this yellow spotting on your leaves, and then eventually that yellow, it'll just be spotting. The whole leaf will go yellow eventually, and then if you don't manage that problem, the whole crop goes yellow. So I've seen people that don't realize this is a mite problem. They think it's a nutritional problem, or maybe too much heat, or fertilizer burn, or something, and it's actually not. It's a spider mite problem. So the key thing to seeing whether, okay, do I have a nutritional problem, or do I have a mite problem? And you think it might be spider mites, because sometimes they don't, you got to see them with a lens, so you don't oftentimes see them with the naked eye, is to look for spider webs. If you see a lot of webbing, real fine, thin webbing that it traps, pretty good at trapping dust, then you know it's most likely a mite problem. And it's not a nutritional problem or some other type of stress or a disease. Let's see here. So the life cycle of these guys is 5 to 40 days, and they're laying eggs at 7 days. Within a week of being born, they're laying eggs. They reproduce insanely fast. They don't beat the aphid, but they are fast. Here's a life cycle of Tetranicus is what it's called. All these different mites, they fall under the Tetranicus genus. So from the egg to the larvae, it's about 7 days. From larvae to protonymph, then back up over to deuteronymph, and then to adult. I believe it was, it's 7 days from the egg all the way to the adult. It's very quick. From egg to larvae, actually from being born up to a larvae is like, I don't even think it's a day. They do it so fast. It's quickly. This is, I think, from larvae to protonymph, it's about a couple of days, and then 3 or 4 days from protonymph to deuteronymph, and then another couple of days from deuteronymph to adult, if I remember it correctly. But It's quick. It's fast. I mean, you could just be gone for 1 week and come out and your whole greenhouse is just taken over by spider mites. It is so fast how they reproduce. Let's see, here's Amblisius Californicus. This is a very, this actually was called Californicus. I wanted to talk about it because we are in California. So Blissius Californicus was naturally, it was found, or let's see, I think it was in the central coastal regions of California, if I remember correctly. But it was specifically found here, but now it's available over the market. It's all over the place now. And it's for controlling two-spotted spider mites, broad mites, and thrips as well. Consumes 5.3 spider mite eggs per day. These guys feed mostly on the eggs, but they will feed on the nymphs and deuteronymphs as well, but mostly on the eggs. And they're eating 5.3 on average eggs per day. A Californicus is another really good one for preventative control of spider mites because they eat the eggs and because they actually, let's see, they are, where's that go? Okay. Well, I didn't write that up there on the slides. I'm sorry. Okay, they're good preventative because they consume the eggs, and two, they don't really reproduce as quickly as Persimilis or some of the other ones, but they live longer. And they can feed on a larger variety of different organisms. So they're pretty tough. And then, but they don't really handle. I don't think they handle the real hot heat, being that they were originally from the coastal regions of California. They can only go up about, I think it was in the ideal temperatures are in the 70s or something like that. If you start getting into the 80s and 90s, I know they really slow down. So if you're trying to put these in a greenhouse that's 90-something degrees or over 100 degrees, they're not as prolific. They won't go as quickly. And obviously, if you have a real heavy infestation, because they're not real heavy feeders, it's not really a good idea to use Californicus for treatment. Okay, so here's Phytocilius persimilis. Here's a picture of Phytocilius persimilis up on top, consuming an adult two-spotted spider mite. And this, like I said, is definitely the silver bullet of IPM. These guys eat, on average, it's 40. They could eat as much as 80-something mites in a day, but average is more like 40. You could see them. This is, again, two-spotted spider mite on the picture in the bottom. You see these are the adults, and these are the eggs. And this is the mite in the adult stage on top.
Okay, so no question. Are they generally bigger than the prey that
So most of your predatory organisms are going to be larger than what they are hunting. But that's not always the case. With Persimilis, they are about the same size as an adult. For adult to adult, they're about the same size as a two-spotted spider mite. I think they're just a little bit larger.
My question is if I release them, I mean, will I be able to tell on
You
my
will be
plant
able to
which
see
one's
them.
the good one and which one's the bad ones?
You can tell which one's good and which one's bad based off of the coloring of the mite. But if you really want to identify for sure what mite you have on your plant, you're going to need a lens and you're going to need to look for it and identify it that way. It's not, you can't do that with the naked eye. Oh, okay. Looks like I am. Sorry, I didn't hook up my battery charger. Now my laptop's about to die. Let's get this hooked up.
What's the temperature range that Persimilis likes?
It likes a little bit cooler, but it can tolerate hot. Okay, sorry, I didn't put that in here. Likes 20 degrees Celsius is the best temperature it likes. But questions on exactly, so that's another thing. You guys are taking notes, and that's great, but these technical sheets you can get from a lot of your biosuppliers, they have a lot of information in there. So when you identify a certain problem in your crop and you're trying to apply a particular biological in it, it's always my recommendation that you get the literature on it. And it's out there. Read it, learn about them, and then you can decide for yourself, is this really the best thing for what I'm trying to do right now? And the time of the year. So, yeah, so I picked this up and just looking at it, I had a question here, but the eggs on Phytocilius persimilis will shrivel up and die at temperatures greater than 86 degrees. So what does that do to our reproductive capacity of Persimilis in the middle of summer? It's probably not going to go, right? You can release the guys, buy them in high numbers, and just throw them out there, and whatever survives, survives if you really got a problem. But something to keep in mind that your reproduction rates are going to be pretty low.
You don't use those in the spring and fall, then?
You use them in the spring and fall all you want. Use them in the summertime in greenhouses. They'll do great. But when it gets real hot, they're not that tolerant to it. And I think this organism was originally found and identified, which is where the whole IPM program was started, because of Phytocilius persimilis, and it was identified in the Netherlands, I believe. So it's that kind of a climate that it was adapted to, which is a lot more, what is that, kind of more like a Pacific Northwest climate if we wanted to compare it with the US. So cold, dreary, rainy, overcasty, that's the kind of climate it originated in. So we bring it down here to this heat, and it doesn't really survive. It doesn't do so well. So here's another one, Aphidolathes Aphidomyza. I think I have gotten, at this point, I am, yes, all right. So now we're getting into the aphid predators. Okay. This guy is feeds on aphids, and then it pupates in the soil. This is a really good, again, preventative organism. This one I would not use for treatment, but the adult forms of Aphidolathes Aphidomyza will feed on mostly the larval stages of the aphids, but they're not real heavy feeders. So this is something that is just nice to release and have in your garden or your farm, but don't expect miracles from it. It's just, it's just a little jab for aphids. And with aphids, to really deal with aphids, you got to hit them with multiple different things, and this is nothing more than just a jab, really. It will consume some aphids, but it's not going to fix any aphid infestation problem you have. But it's great to have it on the team, for sure. Here's the life cycle of an aphid. I mentioned earlier that aphids, not only are they born pregnant, but they reproduce ridiculously quickly. You have to get ahead of this if you're going to control aphids in your production system. There is no way that you can do it without using chemicals if you don't understand the life cycle and if you don't make the applications at the right time to manage this. So if we look at aphids, we have both the sexual and the asexual reproduction cycle. The sexual reproduction cycle, which is on the right, is a male and a female come together. They form an egg, which typically overwinters in the soil somewhere. Once spring comes or the ground thaws, that egg, which overwintered, will hatch. You'll have your first instar, your second instar, your third instar, and then finally your fourth instar. So Aphidolathes would really only feed on first through third. It would never really bother the fourth or the wing type or the wingless type adult. If this is spring, early spring, and we're at the fourth instar, and there's plenty of food, it won't develop wings. It'll go to the wingless female, which will give live birth and continue to reproduce. Just insane. This process just starts, and this.
Give live birth?
They give live birth to other females, and they tend to produce, actually, that's another thing. The wingless female aphid, not only does it give live birth, but 2 out of every 3 aphids born are female. And that's just a rough number, it's really like 1.9 or something like that, but whatever. It's pretty much 2 out of every 3 are female. So if it gives birth to 3 aphids, 2 of them are going to reproduce at the same rate that it just did. The other one will be a male. So then this process starts all over again. And this whole process takes 4 to 10 days for it to reach sexual maturity. So if this one aphid that was born, reached sexual maturity, is wingless, it has plenty of resources to survive, it's going to start giving birth at 4 to 10 days from the day it hatched. That's how quickly that is. And then these that were born alive, They're not eggs. They're born alive,
Already eating.
and they're consuming as soon as they're born. And they're pregnant. And within 5 days, they're laying their next clutch.
So when you flip a leaf over and it has just piles of aphids all together, and you
Yes.
see there's different sizes.
You'll see different sizes, yes. So the little ones are the baby ones. They're the instars, the smaller instars, right? So as it's born, it goes to the first instar. Already, when it was born. It's not even in an egg. The eggs are from the sexual reproductive cycle, which will usually overwinter in the soil somewhere. So these folks will just reproduce so quickly that in order to stay on top of them, you've got to have multiple feeders out there. You cannot just try to treat them with just one particular thing, like one parasitic wasp. And then there are different types of aphids too. So certain parasitic wasps, I'll get into it a little bit later, won't feed on them. So you've got to make sure you got the right ones. And in my opinion, get both. Why even bother? Why bother identifying it? Just put both of them out there. Chances are, if you've got, say, 99, say if you got several billion of these guys out there, there might be several thousand that are the one that you didn't identify. Why let those get out of control? Sometimes that happens. People will release the bios and say, oh, well, we got the potato aphids under control, but now we've got the melon aphids going crazy. Well, you should have released the other bio too, the other parasitic wasp, ahead of time. Just don't even waste your time identifying them. If you got aphids, just hit them with everything you got. Don't waste time, especially if you're a short season grower.
Oftentimes I see ants with the aphids. Are they companions?
Yeah, so with aphids, there are ants that will will form these symbiotic relationships with the aphids, because what they do is they come in during this asexual reproduction cycle, and the ants will pick up these instars and take them to where they want them, and then they'll infest the plant there and start feeding there. And the aphids have these long, piercing, sucking mouth parts like a big straw they can just penetrate the leaf surface with. The ants don't have that. But then when they penetrate that leaf surface, the phloem or the sugar comes out of that leaf, then the ants will come and eat that. So they're working in unison with the what do you call it, the aphids. So when you're dealing with ants, you want to actually try to not only release your bios for the aphids, which is interesting because also one of the things they've studied, what some studies have shown is that that some of those ants that work with the aphids will actually harm or consume some of your beneficial bios. Particularly, I think it was, yes, they'll actually try to kill them and get them out of there to protect the aphids.
Right.
So the ants will actually start attacking the mites that are feeding on the aphids. So you have to also attack the ants. So you got to deal with the ant problem and the aphid problem, because when you have the aphid and the ants, you got two problems, and you got to take care of both, and you got to hit them both differently. With the ants, you want to go with the different ant killers that are, I think they're mostly boron-based, that'll knock down the ants, and then you got to go with the bios, or maybe if it's too bad, then you got to go with the sprays. Here's a picture of Aphidius colomani, and this one will feed, so this one works best on melon aphids, right? And I don't really like potato aphids. And these are all parasitoids. So they come in, they use the stinger, the back part of the wasp, to put their egg into the aphid, parasitizing it. Okay. I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to rush through some of these slides here. Yes, you can buy these wasps. So, well, Aphidius colomani is what you'd find it when you start looking for the bio. You're looking for colomani, but this is for the melon aphids. So these are the aphids you'll see on your cukes, on your watermelons, and on your squash. And then we have Aphidius ervi, which works best on your potato aphids. And these aphids can be a green or a pinkish red color. So the one thing I mentioned with the melon aphids, they tend to have either totally black or they have these two black spots on the back abdomen. With potato aphids, they're either all green or they have this like pinkish red color to them. All right, so that's the only way they really identify them. And then Aphidius ervi is what you want to use for that one. This one works best for that one. And they're not, again, this one's not very effective on melon aphids. They don't particularly like them, so they're kind of picky on what aphids they eat. Here we have now one of the most popular ones. This is probably really the best biocontrol against aphids. It's going to be Delia da punctada, which is ladybugs. Yes, so here's the life cycle of a ladybug. So here's the adult. The adults have the characteristic where once they reach adulthood, they want to fly somewhere, usually at least a mile away, to lay their eggs out there. So when you're purchasing adult lady beetles, you got to understand it's not really a scam, but don't expect them to feed a whole lot on your farm or in your garden. They're not going to really want to. They're going to want to fly away and go somewhere else. So if you've ever bought these organisms and then you release them, or ladybugs, and you release them in your farm and then they just, where'd they go? They're all gone. That's what they instinctively want to do. They want to fly away. They'll breed. They'll mate with with each other, and then the females will go find someplace far away to lay their eggs. They don't want to lay their eggs on your farm, which is why buying adult lady beetles is really not worth the trouble. If you have an infestation, it's definitely not what you want to do if you're using them as a treatment. Because I can assure you, it's not going to give you the results you're looking for. You want to buy the larva or the eggs. You can buy larvae, you can buy eggs. But if you're trying to use them as a treatment, larvae and eggs is what you want, because they're not going anywhere until they become adults.
Which is how long?
It's about 3 weeks. So they'll feed for about 3 weeks before they fly away.
And if they're trapped in your greenhouse?
They'll find a way out. Yeah, they're not going to stay in there. They'll find a way. Trust me, that greenhouse is not as impenetrable as you believe.
I know that. That's why
It's not.
bugs are in there.
And yes, they don't do this. So, okay, so let's say we got the egg now. So we've laid eggs somewhere, or you put the eggs there. You end up with your first instar. At the first instar, lady beetles will eat about 4 aphids a day. And then at the second instar, they'll eat about 13 aphids a day. At the third instar, they'll eat about 35. At the fourth, they'll go all the way up to 56. And when you see the fourth and the third on your crop eating aphids, it's like, wow. It's awesome. It's impressive. I mean, to see these guys just going through, I mean, they're like little T-Rexes. They're just running around, just tearing everything up. They eat so much, so fast. It's extremely impressive. And then they pupate, right? Which they don't eat anything at that point. Then they become adults. Then they might feed a little bit before they leave, but they don't feed a whole lot. Maybe 200 or so aphids before they take off. I'm sorry?
Neem oil hurt those things?
Neem oils and a lot of other chemicals will hurt lady beetles, yes. At the larvae, at the adults. Spinosad would definitely kill adults, for sure. I think, yeah, it'll even kill all the instars because they are beetles. So anything that'll kill, like a Colorado potato beetle or cucumber beetles or what's the other big beetle there? Squash, all the different squash and stink bugs are going to kill ladybugs as well. So if you're going to spray that, you got to realize you're going to interrupt this process. However, once they fly away, I know when I was in Western Mass, a lot of the farmers would just buy the adults because they were cheap. They didn't cost anything. They said, look, I guess it kind of was like an informal agreement amongst a lot of the farmers, just buy lady beetles, right? If I buy them and they fly off of my farm to your farm, then they benefit you, right? And then, so other people, I'll buy them and then they'll fly wherever, and then they'd fly into where we were. So we got a whole bunch that just came in from I don't know where, but somebody paid for them because we had a field infested with aphids, just everywhere. And I had a whole bunch of watermelon planted and a squash. Butternut squash, winter squash. And we had, I think was it 5 acres total, something like that, of squash and watermelons. And they just had so many aphids, I didn't know what to do. 2 or 3 weeks later, I saw a whole bunch of these guys, the 4th and 3rd instar lady beetles, and I saw Colemanni out there, and I saw syrphid flies out there, larvae, and they were all feeding on them. And I said, whoa, cool. About a month later, problem gone. The aphids were totally gone. You had to really look for aphids. You couldn't find them. These were all the melon aphids, too. Oh, I was very impressed with how that worked. Of course, a lot of those bios were bios that had returned from previous generations, right? So if we had let them go, say, in 2015, well, all of a sudden, they're back in 18? They were back in 2018. They flew to somebody else's farm, and then they maybe flew to somebody else's and whatever, and then eventually they came back to ours. So that's the other thing why I say it's not really a scam if you buy the lady beetles. If you've got the money, and you're just like, hey, you know what, I want them in my neighborhood, then fine, release them. They'll go somewhere, and eventually they'll come back. hopefully anyway, unless you live really way out in the middle of nowhere in a very difficult climate, but they will come back. So, all right, now we get into the last couple here. I got to really rush through these, but Steinermia, these are the aphids. I'm sorry, the nematodes I spoke about. So you can buy, and of course, these are everything I'm presenting to you is something you can buy. It's commercially available for growers, and it's also commercially available for people that are gardening. You can buy them in small quantities or large quantities. These guys, Steinermia, purchased, tend to come in a gel formation, and it's best to take that gel formation, put it in some kind of mixing tank of water, and then water it onto your garden, because what will happen is all these little nematodes will dissolve in that gel, and they'll be floating in your water, and then you apply that either to the leaf surface or to the soil, depending on what you're trying to treat. So all that is also in the literature that you can ask the suppliers for. Those things are tiny, very tiny. Like in this picture you see right here, that thing is not even a millimeter long. They are tiny, very tiny. So what they'll do is they'll infect the juvenile host. This is Philatei, Steinermia philatei. They'll infect the juvenile host at the pupating stages, and they will eventually release bacteria that will kill the organisms. Once the organism dies and they leave a bunch of eggs inside that blows up, or they eat the carcass, and then they come out into the soil looking for something else to eat. And that's the life cycle of these nematodes. And of course, the lethal part is the bacteria that they excrete. There's a certain bacteria that they have in their guts, if you will, that they let out, and that's what kills the organisms that they're targeting, which is various different, there's various different types depending on which one you want. And yeah, so thrips will, there you go. Yeah, so this one will control thrips. It's what it's marketed for, but I think it does more than thrips. And the way, with thrips, you lay the eggs, they feed, then they go back into the soil, right, to pupate. And these particular nematodes will attack them while they're pupating in the soil. So this is a nematode. Like a worm, I guess. Really, really tiny worm. No, the nematode releases the bacteria. The bacteria is what actually kills the organism. And then the nematode feeds on the organism. Reproduces and then releases more. There's another one, sometimes I forget how to pronounce these. Heterohebditis, Bacteria 40, which is the same thing, contains an insect-killing symbiotic bacteria, similar to Steinermia philatei. However, this one is for killing grubs and other beetles. What were they? It was beetles and grubs, I think is what they'd go after. There was another one. I can't remember what it was. I think no, I didn't put it in there. It was in here somewhere. Weevil larvae, that's what it was. And then there's Steinermia crucei, which works similarly to Steinermia philatei, used for control of beetles and weevils as well. Okay. The larvae that overwinter, yes. But I've never actually tried to use them to effectively control squash bugs. And because squash bugs can just fly in, it doesn't mean that you'll get rid of the problem. It just means that you'll probably remove a lot of what's there on your garden or your farm. But it doesn't mean your neighbor's squash bugs won't wake up and come over and attack yours. So unfortunately, that doesn't really solve the problem, but it helps to eliminate what's there, which is great. Okay, so here's some shared resources. Now, honestly, I don't even think I scratched the surface. I just barely started talking about IPM. There's so much more that could be said, and there is so much more information out there. I encourage you to continue to seek that information, educate yourself. Every time that you have a problem, look at it as God's invitation for you to learn. Now, seek answers and results. They are Sometimes that's the most frustrating part. But if we will view these issues, these pests and these organisms that come into our farms, in our gardens, as God's opportunity, our lessons that he wants us to teach us, then suddenly it's not quite as difficult to, or anyway, you're not as discouraged when it's time to go looking for results. The results are out there. The results are out there. The only difference between a very educated farmer and a not-so-educated farmer, in my opinion, is experience. Because experience is what really teaches you. As these problems come up, you seek solutions. And somebody earlier, the last hour, had asked about, well, what books do you read, or where do you go to find it? It's like, God doesn't teach through books, except the Bible. He teaches through experience, through struggles, through perseverance, overcoming the challenges that Satan's going to throw at us, that he allows Satan to hit us with, and that's how we end up finding these results. So keep looking for the information. There's tons of information out there for any organism you want to find, and especially all the ones that are sold commercially. So whatever pest problems you have, start asking the right people for the right questions, and you'll get the right answers. I encourage you not to give up. Keep it up, and may the Lord be with you. Here's some websites our Arbical Organics sells to the small growers specifically. BioBest and Copart. BioBest is actually one word. That space shouldn't be there. And then there's Coppert, which is Koppert. That's another provider. Griffin Greenhouse Supplies is somebody that just started selling bios as well. There's a company out in Canada, if you're Canadian, Crop Defenders out of Leamington. BioBest American offices are in Michigan. Coppert, I forget where they were at, but they got offices in the U.S. And then Griffin's is out of the East Coast mostly. And then there's other sources online, tons of sources online. I couldn't even tell you. There's just so many, not just for information, but to purchase bios. My advice is buy them from reputable companies, because some of them will sell you things that are pretty much dead and they don't do anything, especially if you're a home gardener. Try to be very vigilant of who you're buying your bios from, because some of the stuff that's going out to the home growers is just things that, maybe the plane was delayed somewhere, or a truck broke down or something, I don't know, and the organisms are mostly dead. Yeah. And they just say, well, what do we do with this? It's $10,000 worth of whatever, and they end up getting pushed through other channels, and then somehow they end up in a home gardener somewhere who will come back and swear that they tried something and nothing happened. So I encourage you to try to get them from reputable sources. All right, I'll open the floor to questions. Oh, well, just important points. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I still had one more slide, which, well, there we go. I'll leave it with that. Okay, go ahead.
Just to say, if you have a large area that you have some gardens in, because we have a campus and we have several different gardens, what would be some good things that you could just get to let go in your environment that would be good, or to apply to the soil not as a preventative? Or what could we have on hand?
Okay, I think the question is very generalized. What could you release or purchase or apply as a preventative to gardens that you have throughout campus?
It doesn't bring
well, when it comes to sprays and chemicals and things of that nature, especially for small gardens. Oh, you're thinking bios, okay. Well, with the sprays and all the other stuff, I don't think it's worth really keeping anything on hand if you're not an actual grower until you start knowing what your problems are. With IPM, again, it's very similar. You can release lady beetles and they're going to benefit the community in some way or another. They're cheap, inexpensive, let them go. Eventually they'll come back. If there's aphids around or something for them to eat, they'll come back. So that would be lady beetles as far as releasing out into the environment.
What about the wasps?
Wasps, you can release the wasps too, but it's a difficult question to answer because everywhere you go is different, extremely different. And you may just be drops of water in a a big bucket of water, for all you know, because if all your neighbors are already releasing organisms, there's nothing you can really do. It's already there. So unless you're somewhere where you really doubt that you have these beneficial organisms out in the environment, then it's not really, in my opinion, worth releasing for no particular reason at all, unless you suspect you might have certain issues with certain pests. With the suspicion, it'd be good enough to just start releasing preventative amounts, or amounts that would be preventative for whatever organism you're trying to target. Next question.
Back to my leaf curl plum aphid problem. Is there one of the aphid predators that could be released at the bud swell so that they can be a preventative solution? Because the leaf curl plum aphid, attacks as soon as the bud opens and starts to leaf out. Then somehow the cycle there, the eggs hatch, and will jump into the newly forming leaves. And once they get in there, you can't do anything because the leaf curls and they're protected.
Oh, okay.
Lady beetles can't keep up with them. They're too much.
Okay, so you're having aphids that are arriving right at the point of flowering.
I think they're already there
on
in
your
egg
peach
form,
orchard.
But yeah, in the plum orchard.
Or plum orchard. Okay, so what I would guess is that the timing, environmental timing for the hatching of the eggs of the aphid, as well as for flowering of the plums, is they're synchronized, they're real close. So what my recommendation would be probably something as simple as spraying a product called Impede that'll knock down your aphids, just because it's a knockdown spray. That was the same one I'd recommend last hour. It's potassium salts of fatty acid. That's been my best experience with sprays and aphids in organic production anyway, has been Impede.
Yeah. What was it called?
Impede. IMPEDE, if I remember correctly, and the active ingredient is potassium salts of fatty acids. That product would knock down aphids at that point, and then immediately after that start releasing. Well, you could release. I don't know. I have to look at the aphid you have, but you could release Ervi, and well, I would at least release syrphid flies. I didn't put them in there. Ah, man, I didn't talk about syrphid flies. Okay, I forgot. You could release syrphid flies and the Aphidius colemani or Ervi, Aphidius Ervi or Aphidius colemani, and maybe some lady beetles as well. But I think the lady beetles work best on vegetable crops and flower crops, and not so much orchards, because it's such a big area to go from flower to flower. They won't travel from one to the other, right? While parasitic wasp, like a Aphidius colemani and Aphidius Ervi, will fly from flower to flower as necessary, parasitizing different aphid colonies. All right. Once those eggs hatch, they come out, then they'll just keep that cycle going. But in your particular case, where you're saying that they're arriving right as they flower, right as your trees flower, your orchard flowers, that's a tough one. I don't know how you can handle it except through sprays. I think bios would only benefit you if you know where those aphids are coming from. But I can assure you they weren't in the flower. They came from somewhere.
Right.
And most likely it's the soil in the ground, so putting some nematodes into that ground, seeing what that might do would be probably a good idea as well. Just purchase a few nematodes depending on the acreage of your orchard and watering that into the soil and seeing what you might control that way. That might be a better long-term solution. But we don't know. I don't know where these aphids are coming from. If you can figure out where those aphids are coming from, then you can really solve the problem. But I assure you they're not part of the budding of the flower.
Okay, I was just wondering, when you talk about if your neighbors have released any, or they'll go to your neighbors, what is the radius of something like that? How far will your ladybugs go? And if there's nobody else around, within how many miles, then you're pretty much on your own.
So how many miles will lady beetles and other beetles fly, beneficials or non-beneficial insects? That's information that I don't totally know, but I know lady beetles will go about as far as 10 miles, I think. Some of those other pests will go real far too. And then it also depends, because you see these guys, they'll fly up, and then we don't even know what wind currents are up in the air, so I don't know what their terrain is. If you're in a flat part like in, I don't know, Oklahoma, Texas or something, where are you from? You're from Texas.
Northeast Texas.
Northeast Texas, okay. Yeah, so you're out there, I mean, them bugs get up in the air and them wind currents, they can take them miles and miles and miles and miles. I mean, they could be coming in from Kansas for all you know. They could be coming in far when you have that kind of wind currents out there. While in other areas with a lot of canyons and cliffs and things, they may not be traveling as far, less wind. So yeah, the distance is far. So they could, beneficials and non-beneficials could be coming in from, if you're in Texas, they could be coming from anywhere.
Okay.
Long distances. I think he was first, and I'll answer his. And
Okay. In our parks, they have the Japanese ladybug that was released, imported, and they're everywhere, you know. Now, are those specific for the one kind of aphid, or do they get all the kinds of aphids?
Japanese ladybugs. Actually, from what I understand, I don't really know that much about the Japanese ladybug, but I'm pretty sure it was just for all aphids. I don't believe that the Japanese lady beetle was specialized for just one particular type of aphid. But again, I could be wrong. I mean, a quick Google search will answer that question.
Okay.
Oh, I heard that the yellow ladybugs are not good.
I have not heard anything about yellow ladybugs not being good. What was your question?
And when you're laying out your greenhouse and gardens and whatever, do you plan for some beneficial habitat for those predators so that they continue even as the population drops of the target species? Like some of them are pollen feeders, and so would it be worthwhile to plan to provide some kind of habitat to keep them happy in your space?
You're referring to plant. So your question is it worthwhile planning a habitat to keep
to harbor your beneficials?
To harbor your beneficials. So your beneficials tend to want to feed on the pest.
Yeah.
So the only thing is either pest or something pest-like, which, I mean, you don't want to be bringing aphids into your garden. Just they could have, or some other type of pest. So it wouldn't.
Some of you pointed out were also pollinators.
Yeah. So some of them are, right.
And since we're kind of looking at it as preventative,
yeah.
If we had...
What would be my recommendation is to have something on the farm. So, different types of shrubs and bushes that flower and keep pollinators around, which you really want, but also, other beneficial insects. Yes, they do have it for that, but specifically in your greenhouse, most people would say no, because that's square footage you could use to grow, in a greenhouse. But in your farm, overall, yes, you want to have rows of shrubs and other beneficial flowering plants that's going to not only attract pollinators, but attract other beneficial insects as well. Would be definitely, there's a lot of people doing that.
So if I know that I'm going to have trouble with this and this and this, because I do every year, if I call one of these companies and I say, this is the pest I'm trying to deal with, are they helpful? Will they tell me?
Yes. So all these main companies, they have sales representatives, and they have them assigned to different regions. And if you call them up, their main office, they're going to tell you, call this guy or gal. That's your sales rep for wherever you are. So then when you call that sales rep, they're familiar with where you are, the pests you are, and they're probably selling to somebody else in the area. So a lot of the times when we would get word that certain, like I remember there was a whitefly infestation in a farm 30, 40 miles away or something like that, and they were telling us about it. They said, hey, such and such a farm got whiteflies. You guys need to be scouting for whiteflies. That's what a good bios rep would do, and not just sell you bios. A good rep is not just going to want to sell you bios. They're going to inform you of what's going on in your neighborhood. They want to educate you so that you can make good decisions. We went with BioBest. We had Copart. Both of them were excellent, but there are others out there too. The only sad part about it is, however, the one thing I will say is that they are very focused on the size of your production. If you're very small and you're not buying hardly anything from them, then kind of go to the wayside. They don't give you quite as much attention as maybe you'd like, but they'll still answer emails and maybe call you back every once in a while. They're not going to just, they shouldn't anyway. It's not been my experience that they would just totally ignore you. unless you never buy anything from them at all.
Could you buy like plant companion plants that like attract aphids? Like for example, I know calendula love aphid attractors, so they instead of getting onto your vegetables, they would, you know, attack your.
I think doing companion planting with the purpose of attracting aphids is something that would be ideal in outdoor production, where you would have certain areas. You say, well, look, I want to put this here. I'm putting it as a trap. You don't want to do too much because then you'll have too many, right? And then if you do that, if you do put these plants out there with the purpose of targeting something like aphids, well, then you want to put mites and other pests and, you know, that feed on aphids. You want to introduce them at that point, right? Instead of putting it on your crop, though I would still want to put at least a little bit on the crop, I would want to put it there because that's where they're going to favor. And if there's an aphid flying around looking for a home, then that's where you want them to land, and that's where you want the predators to be at. So both predator and prey are at that same spot.
Did you talk about earwigs at all?
I did not. I did not.
Some people say they're beneficial, and some people, and obviously they do, like seedlings and stuff.
I have not talked about earwigs. I think I've never had a problem with earwigs, so I don't really have a lot of experience with earwigs. All right. I think we're getting towards the end here. Yeah, it pretty much is. But, okay.
Our neighbor has jumping worms that came with mulch and things. Do you know anything about jumping worms?
I don't know. I've never heard anything about jumping worms. I'm sorry.
Supposed to kill them anytime you see them.
So this is.
Eat those in the ground?
They're much bigger than.
You can put nematodes into your compost pile, but I don't know if they would deal with that particular pest. I've never dealt with jumping worms.
It's like a night crawler that actually jumps. It's big, a big night crawler type.
How specific are the nematode as far as predating in soil?
So nematode specificity is not really that. They're pretty broad. You know, they're going to look for something. They're going to try to eat it. But it tends to stick within certain types of, you know, pests. So like some of them might focus on grubs and beetles, while others are wanting to feed on different organisms. They just use different mechanisms. So if there's something there where their mechanisms will work to hunt, to kill, to eat, then they're going to try. You know, they're not going to just die. So one of the things that I'd say is because some of these bios are so cheap since they produce them, they mass produce them. If you think it might because you see the similar physical characteristics, then try doing it. Give it a shot. See if it works for you. And if it does, awesome. You know, sometimes it doesn't. I've done that too. I've had beetles that have come in, and I'm just like, I don't know what this is. I could never get anybody to tell me what this thing was. But I knew what it looked like and what similarities, and I knew, well, this is a beetle. So I treated it as a beetle, and I got rid of it. You know, so I got rid of the problem just by doing that.
So under jumping worms, then.
All right, I think we're all done here. We'll call it a show here.